back to Mika Reaction Reviews, where reacting review to things on the internet, and welcome to my first Patreon video. Alright guys, so for my Patreon, I think I'm gonna do a bit of a different video. It won't be really music unless I do music and it gets blocked and I'll upload it to my Patreon or Rumble or something like that. But I wanted to try something different for my Patreon audience and do something like more intellectual, more thought pieces, more conversational pieces, and we'll throw some fun stuff in there too. Tell me guys, what do you think? If you enjoy these type of videos, let me know. Comment, let me know what you want for Patreon. But anyway, today we are going to react to a video that was uploaded by Academy of Ideas, which is a channel that I'm really loving these days. They put out a lot of thought pieces without the emotional triggering and anger and sort of pulling to one side or not another, biases and stuff like that. It's just sort of like intellectual. And the title of this one is a Mass Hysteria the Greatest Threat to Humanity? This is uploaded 10 months ago and it has 612,000 views and 31,000 likes. So I don't know if I'll stop it so much for Patreon, but I'll stop it when I feel like I have something to add and give a bit of my commentary in the end. Alright, let's get into it.
All one's neighbors are in the grip of some uncontrolled and uncontrollable fear. In lunatic asylums, it is a well-known fact that patients are far more dangerous when suffering from fear than when moved by rage or hatred. According to the psychologist Carl Jung, the greatest threat to civilization lies not with the forces of nature, nor with any physical disease, but with our inability to deal with the forces of our own psyche. We are our own worst enemies, or as the Latin proverb puts it, man is a wolf to man. In Civilization in Transition, Jung states that this proverb is a sad yet eternal truism, and our wolf-like tendencies come most prominently into play at those times of history when mental illness becomes the norm rather than the exception in a society, a situation which Jung termed a psychic epidemic. Indeed, it is becoming ever more obvious, he writes, that it is not famine, not earthquakes, not microbes, not cancer, but man himself, who is man's greatest danger to man, for the simple reason that there is no adequate protection against psychic epidemics, which are infinitely more devastating than the worst of natural catastrophes. In this video, we are going to explore the most dangerous of all psychic epidemics, the mass psychosis. A mass psychosis is an epidemic of madness, and it occurs when a large portion of society loses touch with reality and descends into delusions. Such a phenomenon is not a thing of fiction. Two examples of mass psychoses are the American and European witch hunts of the 16th and 17th centuries, and the rise of totalitarianism in the 20th century. During the witch hunts, thousands of individuals, mostly women, were killed not for any crimes they committed, but because they became the scapegoats of societies gone mad. In some Swiss villages, writes Francis Hill, there were scarcely any women left alive after the frenzy had finally burned itself out. The totalitarian experiments of the 20th century are a more recent and a more deadly example of a mass psychosis. In countries such as the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, North Korea, China, and Cambodia, it was a collective detachment from reality and a descent into delusions and paranoia that permitted the rise of the all-powerful totalitarian governments that destroyed the lives of hundreds of millions. The totalitarian systems of the 20th century represent a kind of collective psychosis, writes the medical doctor Just Mirlu. Whether gradually or suddenly, reason and common human decency are no longer possible in such a system. There is only a pervasive atmosphere of terror and a projection of the enemy, imagined to be in our midst. Thus society turns on itself, urged on by the ruling authorities. When a mass psychosis occurs, the results are devastating. Jung studied this phenomenon thoroughly and wrote that the individuals who make up the infected society become morally and spiritually inferior. They sink unconsciously to an inferior intellectual level. They become more unreasonable, irresponsible, emotional, erratic, and unreliable. And worst of all, crimes the individual alone could never stand are freely committed by the group smitten by madness. What makes matters worse is that those suffering from a mass psychosis are unaware of what is occurring. For just as an individual gone mad cannot step out of his mind to observe the errors in his ways, so too there is no Archimedean point from which those living through a mass psychosis can observe their collective madness.
Okay, we're gonna stop it there at the 4-minute mark. Whew, he said a lot. So he is, I think, getting a lot of information from Carl Jung, which is someone I'm also really getting into and very excited about. I'll probably put this person on my the Patreon anyway. So in the beginning, you talked about like people tend to act more violent and dangerous when they're scared. That's evident when you see animals. Most time animals attack when they are threatened, when they're scared. That's why sometimes people tell you not to be scared around dogs and stuff like that, because they can feel the fear from you, and they're like, why are you scared? You're making me scared. And it's more likely they're going to attack out of fear. I think fear is one of the most irrational emotions to sort of like stew in. My mom always told me never to make decisions out of fear, because when you make decisions out of fear, you're usually using your irrational side of your brain or your rational brain. And so calm yourself down before making decisions. Is also been told many times by people smarter than me that fear is one of the easiest ways. If you can put a massive amount of people in a state of constant fear and anxiety, it becomes easier to control that person, because like they're looking for a hero, they're looking for a solution. And so like, hey, here's the solution to get rid of the thing that you're scared of. Let me be the one to slay the enemy, the enemy that you're scared of. You know, attacking each other because you're looking for the enemy, and it's being sort of championed by the mainstream, by the elites, by the people who are sort of overlooking everything. So when you have people like Don Lemon and Howard Stearns and other talking heads on TV saying yes, like they should be eliminated from society, or they should be not eliminated, but they should be sort of cast out of civil society, they shouldn't be giving any health care and stuff like that, and then you hear a massive amount of applause from the audience, this is basically what this video was talking about. And one of the reasons why I wanted to bring up this video, because in one of Joe Rogan's most recent videos where he talked to Dr. Malone, the guy who created or formulated the spike protein in the vaccine, he talks about either mass hysteria or mass psychosis. And the media went crazy and accused him of saying that the vaccine causes mass psychosis, and it doesn't. He was saying that the fear mongering and the narrative was causing mass hysteria or mass psychosis. And I have this hard time understanding why people don't understand. Like, if this happened before, which the video already pointed out, it happened in the Salem witch trials and in authoritarian sort of regimes like in Cambodia, China, Germany and stuff like that. I don't understand why people don't think it can happen again. Like, for some reason human beings have just evolved beyond it or something like that. History can repeat itself. Sort of not having a rational mind. That's why some people you talk to about this stuff, it's like you can literally show them the facts right in front of their face, and it's like they can't even like absorb it. It's like their common sense went out of the window. But anyway, we're going to continue.
Or as Jung writes concerning the psychic epidemic that swept through Germany under Hitler's rule, the phenomenon we have witnessed in Germany was nothing less than an outbreak of epidemic insanity. No one knew what was happening to him, least of all the Germans, who allowed themselves to be driven to the slaughterhouse by their leading psychopaths, like hypnotized sheep. But what gives rise to a mass psychosis? And what makes a society susceptible to this devastating phenomenon? For an answer, we must begin at the basics. We must explain what is meant by a psychosis, and what leads an individual into a state of madness. With this information, we can then examine how this process plays out on a mass scale. A psychosis can be defined as a detachment from reality or the loss of an adaptive relationship to reality. In place of thoughts and beliefs that conform to the facts of the world, the psychotic becomes overrun by delusions, which are false beliefs considered to be true despite the existence of evidence that proves the contrary. Delusion, writes Just Mirlu, can be defined as the loss of an independent, verifiable reality, with the consequent relapse into a more primitive stage of awareness. Delusions can take many forms. Some psychotics develop delusions of paranoia, and believe they are constantly being followed, tracked, and observed. Others, such as catatonic schizophrenics, develop delusions about their ability to alter the state of the universe merely with the movement of their body, and so remain constricted in statue-like poses. But while delusions are false in the sense of not conforming to the facts of the external world, they are considered true to the psychotic, and so influence how they interact with the world and with other people. Or as Jung writes, "If a man imagined that I was his arch-enemy and killed me, I should be dead on account of mere imagination." Imaginary conditions do exist, and they may be just as real and just as harmful or dangerous as physical conditions. I even believe that psychic disturbances are far more dangerous than epidemics of physical disease or earthquakes. While a descent into the delusions of a psychosis has many triggers, such as an excessive use of drugs or alcohol, brain injuries, or other illnesses, these physical causes will not concern us here. Our concern is with psychological, or what are called psychogenic triggers, as these are what usually lead to the mass psychosis. The most prevalent psychogenic cause of a psychosis is a flood of negative emotions, such as fear or anxiety, that drives an individual into a state of panic. When in a state of panic, one naturally seeks relief, as it is too mentally and physically draining to subsist in this hyper-emotional state for a prolonged period of time. To escape the fear and anxiety of the panic state, a positive or negative reaction can take place, and the positive reaction takes the following form. A greater effort is called forth, writes Jung. The individual will show more strength and willpower, and will try to overcome the obstacle or the cause of misery through physical, intellectual, and moral effort. If the strength of one individual is not sufficient, he will seek the help of others. If such an ultimate attempt fails, or if an individual is too weak from the start to show fight, then a negative reaction takes place. At the extreme, the negative reaction is a psychotic break. A psychotic break is not a descent into a state of greater disorder, as many believe, but a reordering of one's experiential world which blends fact and fiction, or delusions and reality, in a way that helps end the feelings of panic.
Right, stopping it there. He talks about when people are in psychosis and are having delusions, that the delusions are just as real to them as reality is to you. And I feel like it kind of harkens back to that saying, like, perception is reality. So just because someone experiences something and that's how they feel and that's how they experienced it, doesn't necessarily mean that that's what happened, because your perception is reality. So two people can be looking at the same situation and experience it in two different ways and relay their experience to someone else, two other people, in two different ways, because they experienced it in two different ways. It doesn't make one a liar, one not. It's just that the perception is reality, but doesn't mean that the reality is fact. So that's one thing. But going back to when he was saying, like, that a sort of a society that's already sort of been pruned with mental health issues is probably easy and more susceptible to mass psychosis or mass hysteria, is if you look at the West right now, the United States, we've had a mental health uptick for a long time. People might even say there's a mental health epidemic or a very mental health rapid rise, and according to doctors and scientists and data, that the last 2 years mental health has skyrocketed. And so you already have that, plus I mentioned this in another video on my YouTube channel, that the U.S. takes up over 80% of pharmaceuticals and psychotropic pharmaceuticals, like antipsychotic medicines and antidepressants and stuff like that, and the U.S. is only 5% of the planet. That is absolutely ridiculous. So you already have the West, including the U.S., is already sort of very susceptible to mental health issues because we've been struggling for a long time, and then you introduce this. It's no wonder why people are fucking losing their minds. But let's continue.
Silvano Arietti, one of the 20th century's foremost authorities on schizophrenia, explains the psychogenic steps that lead to madness. Firstly, there is the phase of panic, when the individual starts to perceive things in a different way, is frightened on account of it, appears confused, and does not know how to explain the strange things that are happening. The next step is what Arietti calls a phase of psychotic insight, whereby an individual succeeds in putting things together by devising a pathological way of seeing reality, which allows him to explain his abnormal experiences. The phenomenon is called insight because the patient finally sees meaning and relations in his experiences. But the insight is psychotic because it is based on delusions, not on adaptive and life-promoting ways of relating to whatever threats precipitated the panic. The delusions, in other words, allow the panic-stricken individual to escape from the flood of negative emotions, but at the cost of losing touch with reality. And for this reason, Arrietty says that a psychotic break can be viewed as an abnormal way of dealing with an extreme state of anxiety. The American psychologist Alexander Lowen echoes this sentiment. Two factors are important in the dynamics of a psychotic break, he writes. One is an ego that is weak or insecure. The other factor is a flood of feeling that cannot be integrated by the ego. When it is understood that a flood of negative emotions, in conjunction with a weak and insecure sense of self, can trigger a descent into madness, it becomes clear how a mass psychosis can occur. A population first needs to be induced into a state of intense fear or anxiety by threats real, imagined, or fabricated. And once in a state of panic, the door is open for either the positive or negative reaction to unfold. If a society is composed of self-reliant, resilient, and inwardly strong individuals, a positive reaction can take place. But if it is composed of mainly weak, insecure, and helpless individuals, a descent into the delusions of a mass psychosis becomes a real possibility.
I'm stopping it there. I was going to let it play to the end, but I had to stop it there. If you look at the people who seem the most freaked out, the most scared, acting the most irrational, what side of the coin do they usually fall on, politically or when it comes to their ideology? And what type of characteristics do people a part of that ideology have? They usually have a very collective and tribalistic mentality, and the people who seem to go the other way, that is sort of like more self-sufficient, less freaked out, less scared, kind of more calm, usually have a more individualism mentality, and usually leans a certain way when also politically, usually conservative, moderate, so that's quite interesting. And I feel like when it comes to sort of tribalism, a lot of those people tend to want to hang on to sort of someone to help them. They believe that the government should take control. They think the government should take care of everything, leaving them more weak and less efficient to someone who doesn't believe in those things. I know, I just thought that was really interesting. He says something about weak character or weak state of self-identity. And again, when you are a tribalist or someone who believes in a collective, your identity usually comes from the tribe and a collective that you're in, other than someone who's an individualist where their identity comes from them. You know, it's inward, internal instead of external. You know what I mean? So I thought that was really interesting. Anyway, let's continue.
Great stress, in other words, can bring out the best in an individual or society at large, but it can also bring out the worst, or as the psychologist Anthony Storr writes about the potential for a mass psychosis. It is only if we accept the existence of a latent paranoid potential lurking in the recesses of the normal mind that we can explain the mass delusions which led to the persecution of witches and the Nazi slaughter of Jews. Vast numbers of ordinary men and women held beliefs about witches and Jews which, if they had been expressed by one or two individuals instead of by whole communities, would have been dismissed as paranoid delusions. There are extremely primitive, irrational mental forces at work in the minds of all of us, which are usually overlaid and controlled by reason, but which find overt expression in the behavior of those whom we call mentally ill, and which also manifest themselves in the behavior of normal people when under threat or other forms of stress. In the next video of the series, we will explore how certain ideas, or what the Russian author Fyodor Dostoevsky called demons, can induce a societal-wide flood of negative emotions and therefore pave the way for a mass psychosis. Ideas, as we will learn, are so powerful that at times they can possess us, consume us, or even destroy us. Those who control the flow of information in a society and the ideas we accept as true or false exert a great power over the course of civilization. It was not you who ate the idea, wrote Dostoevsky. but the idea that ate you. Or as Jung echoes, once upon a time men were possessed by devils. Now they are not less obsessed by ideas.
That was really good, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed that. The last part, or the last bit I would like to add on to it, is that we have seen so many people freaking lose their minds lately, act in ways that is not normal, but for some reason normalized to those people, like putting your child in the trunk of a car to drive to the doctor because they have an illness. Like, I saw a picture of a child literally in a plastic bag, and then the plastic bag had holes in it so the child can breathe. So what is the fucking point of the plastic bag if it already has holes in it? So if the virus came around them, it doesn't make any sense. It's not common sense. People on planes literally physically, violently attacking someone because they didn't comply to what you wanted them to do. Like, people threatening children with death because they weren't wearing a diaper on their face. Like, people acting so irrationally because most of these people surround themselves with an echo chamber. There's no one telling them that they're losing their fucking grip of reality, on reality. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. I love these type of conversations. These are the type of conversations I like to have in my everyday life. So I thought that this is the type of videos that, not every video is going to be serious, but this is kind of the type of videos that I would like to be reacting to on my Patreon, along with the many other things that I'll be putting on my Patreon. But let me know the type of videos that you would like to see VIP. All right, let me know, guys. You guys have an amazing day. Bye.